Welcome back to the Badass Literature Society, where badasses come together to rate and review novels recommended by you. Hi, I'm Michael.
This is Barbara.
And welcome to the first episode of Season 6. Can't believe we're at Season 6. We've been, every time we like to talk about a new season, yeah. Unfortunately, it's just Barbara and I today. We don't have Lauren with us. She will hopefully be back next month. But yeah, welcome to a brand new season. This month, we read She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker-Chan. Shelley Parker-Chan is an Australian by way of Malaysia and New Zealand, a 2017 Tiptree Fellow. They are the author of the historical fantasy novel She Who Became the Sun. Parker-Chan spent nearly a decade working as a diplomat and international development advisor in Southeast Asia, where they became addicted to epic East Asian historical TV dramas. After a failed search to find English-language book versions of these stories, they decided to write their own. Parker-Chan currently lives in Melbourne, Australia, where they are very grateful to never have to travel by leaky boat ever again. Barbara, you want to tell us a little bit about the book?
Yes, so this was originally published on July 20th of 2021. It's considered fantasy, historical fiction, and like genres and LGBTQ genre.
On Goodreads, yeah, that was a third genre.
Huh, interesting. I don't think I've heard about that. Anyways, it is 416 pages, currently has a 3.9 on Goodreads, 4.3 on Amazon, and a 4.4 on Audible. She Who Became the Sun is a two-time British Fantasy Award winner, an Astounding Award winner, a Lambda Literary Award finalist, a Hugo Award finalist, a Locus Award finalist, and an Otherwise Award finalist. It was also nominated for 2 Goodreads Choice Awards in 2021, Reader's Favorite Fantasy and Reader's Favorite Debut Novel. We think it's important for readers to know what, if any, representation is in the books we read. For this book, there are major POC characters, major LGBTQ plus characters, and major characters with disabilities.
And since Lauren's not here, I will read a little synopsis of this one. To possess the mandate of heaven, the female monk Zhu will do anything. I refuse to be nothing. In a famine-stricken village on a dusty yellow plain, 2 children are given 2 fates. A boy, greatness. A girl, nothingness. In 1345, China lies under harsh Mongol rule. For the starving peasants of the Central Plains, greatness is something found only in stories. When the Zhu family's 8th-born son, Zhu Chongba, is given a fate of greatness, everyone is mystified as to how it will come to pass. The fate of nothingness received by the family's clever and capable second daughter, on the other hand, is only as expected. When a bandit attack orphans the 2 children, though, it is Zhu Chongba who succumbs to despair and dies. Desperate to escape her own fated death, the girl uses her brother's identity to enter a monastery as a young male novice. There, propelled by her burning desire to survive, Zhu learns she is capable of doing whatever it takes, no matter how callous, to stay hidden from her fate. After her sanctuary is destroyed for supporting the rebellion against Mongol rule, Zhu takes the chance to claim another future, her brother's abandoned greatness. So, what did you think about She Who Became the Sun? Remember, no spoilers.
Overall, I enjoyed the book. It was a little confusing to the time frame. Like, yes, there are like markers in the book, but it's split into like 3 parts, and it like the first part covers a huge chunk of time because it follows Zhu as a young child and then through her monk I don't know.
That works for me. Training.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it covers like when she's, I think, 7 until, I think it's a 10-year span, so she's like 17 or something like that. So figuring that part out was a little difficult in the beginning, but like once you get used to the way the author writes, and B, how it's broken down that way, I think it was a lot easier to process once I feel like every new book or every new author that you pick up and you read their book, I feel like there's always a little bit of a growing pain just to learn how they write and how you process the information of like what they wrote in the book. So I feel like that's kind of any new author that you pick up. But other than that, I thought it was very good. I really enjoyed it. I liked the pacing. I didn't have any issues with the pacing. I really enjoyed the characters. The characters are amazing. I think it's both a plot and character driven story, I feel like, but maybe it leans more towards character driven. It really literally character driven in the sense that the characters are literally like, I'm going to do this, damn it.
Right.
So, but yeah, overall I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
I also really enjoyed the book. I have a similar gripe to Barbara's as far as how the book was separated into chapters. Like she said, it, so what obviously what I would have preferred, I'll say that first, would be if the chapters were like other books I've read, where it's like chapter 7 Zhu, and like that's the chapter from that character's perspective. The
Yeah.
way that it was split up in the book, though, is that the chapters were labeled by the location that it took
Yes.
place and the year, or month, I guess technically
Yeah,
the
it's
yeah,
month.
the month and the location, and then it would have multiple. The chapter was then broken up into parts that were the different perspectives, but they were unlabeled.
Yeah.
And so for me, and I think that if Lauren was here and she had read the book, she would have a similar complaint. Listening to it, that made it very confusing sometimes when it switched, because in the audiobook there was no like distinction of we're moving to a new perspective. So sometimes you'd be like, wait, hold on, what?
Mhm.
And I have to go back. And so I found this one, normally I listen and read, like a little hybrid model. This one I found I had to read more of it using my Kindle as opposed to listening, because I found it very hard. It was frustrating to have to constantly go back. So personally, I didn't like the way that was structured. That has no bearing on the story. The story was fantastic. The characters were fantastic. Like Barbara said, it was very. I would agree with that it's character and plot driven. I did have a little bit of an issue with the pacing in parts of the middle of the book. I thought that it kind of dragged a little bit, but at the end of the day, it did hook me in at the beginning, and then when we got on the other side of what I perceived as dragging, it hooked me back in. So it was a really good book. I definitely enjoyed it. Like always, we're not going to go into our individual ratings for now. Got to wait till the end for that. But our group score for She Who Became the Sun was an 8.25 out of 10. So, would you recommend this book? That's a really good question. I think that yes, to the right person. I don't think this is a book that I would recommend just to everyone. I think if someone really enjoys historical fiction and historical fantasy as well, this is an easy recommendation. I think that I would probably let people know up front, maybe about my gripes about the chaptering, to see if that was something they also didn't like. But I think overall, I think it's a book you could recommend to anybody who enjoys history or fantasy, but definitely history. I think this book, at least I thought, my opinion is that it leaned a lot more on the history and historical fiction side than it did on the fantasy side of things. So that's my answer for that.
Yeah, it's hard to say like what about like obviously this is historical in the sense that these people are real people. Like if you actually know anything about Chinese history, then you can just Google these people and they're there. Like you can read in a Wikipedia article about them. So it's like the author took real, I think, events and then put it in a fantasy world. For your stereotypical fantasy, what you think of like magic and dragons and I don't know, horses. I don't know. Whatever your stereotypical. Normally it's like magic or some
Magic,
type of
dragons, horses.
my three favorite things in that order. Like this doesn't have that. Like there, without spoiling anything, like there's little to no. Well, there's no dragons. Spoiler alert. I know, right? But there are characters with, I'll just say this, mandates, as the back of the book mentions. It's a mandate, right? And what that is, it's like their magic, if you were to call it that. It just essentially just means that you've been touched by a higher power or whatever,
It
and
would
that's
be
it.
light fantasy.
Right, right. So it's not like you're not gonna get like what you would think like a sterile. It's not stereotypical fantasy, and I really enjoy that because it's a nice breath of fresh air. Is that the saying? Did I
That
say
is in
that?
fact the saying.
Nice,
Yeah,
nailed
you
it.
sure did.
Because it does take place in China, and you get like these different cultural aspects. Because normally it's a European fantasy, and I'm kind of tired of reading those. They are kind of similar, so it's nice to read something that is so very drastically different. And I didn't have an issue with most of that fantasy stuff missing from this because I still thought it was really cool. And I didn't really study anything about like this period of time. Like that's not something my school covered, really. Like
Yep,
it's like
same.
very tiny, if that. So this was all new to me, so I was like, ooh, tell me more, what's gonna happen? But like if you really wanted to, you could technically spoil the story for yourself and just like Google it. But it's different because obviously, like I said, I think they took aspects of actual things in history and added it to this fantasy world. The original question is, would I recommend it? Knowing all of that, I feel like if you are someone who enjoys, I feel like if you say you enjoy fantasy, you should in general enjoy this, because like you really should be have more of a broad sense of like what fantasy is. So I think because of that, if you're like someone like Lauren who who normally doesn't read this genre, I feel like this would be it's two things. This would be an easy one to step into, because there's not a lot of like magic systems for you to memorize, or like crazy dragons or all this other stuff. There are a lot of characters to remember, but like that's any fantasy novel that is the same. There's a lot of like moving pieces in this, and then the political intrigue I feel like is, I guess, a staple for fantasy too, which I'm starting to realize. I didn't It wasn't too hard to figure out. You just have to remember, like, there's literally, it's a war, there's two sides, side A, side B. And then within those sides, there's obviously going to be like backstabbing and all this other stuff, which is that part is, I feel, stereotypical of a fantasy plot. So maybe if you don't like that kind of stuff, that might be a little hard. But like, I think this was overall easy to understand, in the sense like there's not this crazy world building to figure out, because it takes place in our world. Like it's
Right.
not like a new fantasy world that you have to memorize, like what the heck is the sea called, and like what is like this is China. Like
Yep.
you can look at a map of this period of time in China and you'll see these landmarks, you'll see these things. Like the only thing you have to get used to is, like in any fantasy novel, remembering what names are and places are. But that's a normal fantasy thing. Like it's
Yeah.
not like people are called Bob and you can just be like, oh, okay, Bob. Like once again, no one in fantasy is called Bob. Like there's no Bob. So it's just remembering people and places like that. And once you can figure that out, I think it becomes easy. I honestly think this is easier to read than like is it Brandon Sanderson, the one with the crazy magic system that's really intricate but really cool but kind of hard to understand? Is that him?
Yes. Mistborn is
Okay.
what you're referring to.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Like it's a lot easier to understand this because it's historical,
Yeah.
So I think you have to be open minded about that and enjoy that stuff. But I think I would recommend it to anyone who generally enjoys fantasy. Maybe someone who's thinking about reading fantasy. I would see like there's like easy, medium, hard. I would put this in the maybe easy, medium category, like right there, like kind of tiptoeing the line on both of those.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think I would also add that it would very much help if the person who's going to maybe read this book has some interest in learning about Chinese history during the Ming Dynasty,
Mm.
because I thought like having that interest, because it's gonna take some effort to be able to try to learn that and try to get into it, and it's worth it, 100% worth it. But if you've got that interest going into it, like I'd like to learn some more about this time period, like the author did when they wrote it, then that's definitely a winner.
Selling
And
factor. Yeah.
exactly. For those of you leaving us at this point, don't forget to give us a rating if you like us, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Our handle in both places is at Badass Lit Pod. We'd love to hear from you. If you have a book you want us to read, let us know. Now, Barbara's going to read a short preview of our next episode. Next month, we are reading Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldtree.
A true fantasy book, right?
I would still probably, I mean, light fantasy because of what it is, maybe, but
I don't
I
know
don't know.
about life. Isn't there like orcs and stuff? Like that's literally what if like they're not real people.
That's true.
Like, oh
Hopefully,
yeah, in She Who Became the Sun, they're just humans. After a lifetime of bounties and bloodshed, Viv is hanging up her sword for the last time. The bout-to-weary orc aims to start fresh, opening the first ever coffee shop in the city of Thune. But old and new rivals stand in the way of success, not to mention the fact that no one has the faintest idea what coffee actually is. If Viv wants to put the blade behind her and make her plans a reality, she won't be able to go it alone. But the true rewards of the uncharted path are the travelers you meet along the way. And whether drawn together by ancient magic, flaky pastry, or a freshly brewed cup, they may become partners, family, and something deeper than she ever could have dreamed.
I'm excited for this one. I think it's going to be like a cozy fantasy, a la like cozy video games like Stardew Valley and
Right.
those
This is
kinds of.
definitely the definition of a cozy fantasy, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, that's probably the genre.
Probably so. Now, remember, the second part of this episode is going to be an in-depth look at She Who Became the Sun. So if you do want to read it, stop listening now and come back when you're done. Nom Nom is fresh dog food made by real people who really care. They're purposeful and enthusiastic about giving your dog the best food for them and their health, so they can thrive and be their best. Nom Nom delivers fresh food made with whole ingredients backed by veterinary science. And science tells us that dog health starts in the bowl, so improving their diet is one of the best ways to help them live a long, happy life. All you have to do is order, pour, and serve. Barbara and I have 2 dogs, Luna, a husky, and Quinny, a Shih Tzu mix. Our 2 dogs love the beef mash recipe, but to be honest, I'd say Quinny's favorite is the turkey fare. She drools when that comes out of the fridge. Yes, I know, Luna. I'm going to tell them about that right now. Luna is an extremely picky eater and always has been. She usually takes forever to warm up to new food, but not with Nom Nom. She dove in immediately. Both dogs seemed to have more energy, and Luna's stools were no longer soft. Your dog's health starts in the gut. A better diet means softer coats, more energy, better breath, and smaller, more consistent stools. Your dog can't tell you if they're healthy, but you can tell when their health improves. It's the easiest way to take the guesswork out of feeding your dog the best. Nom Nom meals are pre-portioned for your dog's exact caloric needs. Board-certified vet nutritionists are kind of a big deal, and Nom Nom has 2 on staff that work extensively to ensure everything gets sent out is the very best for your dog's livelihood. So how does Nom Nom work? You tell them about your pup, age, breed, weight, allergies, and protein preferences. Then they tailor a specific amount of individually packaged Nom Nom meals and send them straight to you. Store the meals in the freezer or fridge until it's mealtime. They'll give you specific instructions on how to transition your dog from foods like kibble to always fresh Nom Nom for best results. Watch your dog clean their dishes, dance for dinner, and overall thrive. Ready to make the switch to fresh? Order Nom Nom today. Go to a link in the description of this episode and then use our referral code, BADASSLIT. That's BADASSLIT, and get 50% off your first order plus free shipping. Plus, Nom Nom comes with a money-back guarantee. If your dog's tail isn't wagging within 30 days, Nom Nom will refund your first order. No fillers, no nonsense, just Nom Nom. Now, for those of you sticking around for the spoilers, here we go. So we're going to start out like we always start out in the second half and figure out who gets the Badass Character Award. Barbara, who is your nominee?
Okay, this is hard because, and obviously we're in the spoiler section, so you're going to get spoiled. The main characters that we follow, literally all of them are very great characters to even leaning towards villainous main characters, villainous heroes, if you want to call them heroes, or protagonists. I want to call them heroes. So they're villainous protagonists, really. Out of all of the characters that we get a point of view, and this book is written in third person perspective. So out of everyone we follow, the only one who isn't gray area to like dark is Ma. Everyone else, like Zeus starts off with great intentions, but she slowly, to get what she wants, starts staining that cloak to more gray, to even, I think at the end of the book, anti-hero, if you ask me. You know, and it's funny because like she was all like, oh hey, like, you know, I don't want to be like that bad people who wants to leave this world in a worse place, and I don't want to just step on all the smaller people type thing to get to the top. And then she starts doing that, and it's like, huh. So it's hard because like if you remove that, I would say Zhu would be the Badass Character Award, because like really, she literally came from poverty, from nothing, from starving, and accomplished all of this stuff, but like to the detriment of who is the issue. So it's really hard to give it to her knowing what she's, you know, like if halfway through the book I would have been like, yeah, Zhu, no problem. At the end I'm like, I don't know if I agree with what she's done. So it's hard. I kind of want to say, man, I don't know. Do I want to give it to Zhu for just everything that she's accomplished? But it's like, with a caveat, I guess I will go with her. If not, I would pick Ma, because out of everyone, I want more of her. I'm hoping maybe in the second book we get more of that, and I'm hoping that she's going to be Zhu's moral compass, because none of these characters have it. Like they don't have a moral compass. She's literally the only one with a moral compass. So yeah, I would say Zhu with Ma, right there. I feel weird giving it to these characters, I guess.
I mean, I agree with you. Zoo's not my pick. My pick was Ma.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that, like, I loved Zoo's character and a lot of the other characters we get. Obviously, I feel like the characters seem more realistic when they're not just like, the perfect hero.
Right.
But, and a big but, if I walk up to like a stranger and I say, let me tell you something about a character, and you tell me if that character is evil or good, and I just say, the character murdered a child, your response isn't going to be like, well, I don't know. It's going to be, oh man, that person's probably evil. Zoo killed the child. We're in the spoiler section. I can
Right.
say that. Like, she did a lot of things that I think are pretty far on the wrong side. I mean,
Right.
also, like, her whole life starts out with a lie. Like, this whole thing begins with her choosing to take on her brother's identity and her brother's fate. Ma is my pick for the Badass
Yeah.
Character Award. Ma is a badass. She puts up with a lot of things that she should not have to put up with, but obviously is realistic for her to put up with in the
Right.
1300s in China. But yeah, she's a fantastic character. She absolutely deserves the Badass Character Award.
Yeah.
Are we going to give it to her then, since she was like your runner-up, or how does this work? Because you
Yeah.
technically nominated Zhu.
I did kind of. I don't know. I don't I'm okay with giving it to Ma.
Right. Ma, come on down. You win the Badass Character Award for the month. Speaking of the characters, let's talk about them a little bit before we jump into our discussion questions. Since you have so many mixed feelings on Zhu, Barbara, would you like to give us a little snapshot of her?
Sure. So she is technically an unnamed protagonist in the beginning because we don't know her name. She grows up impoverished, essentially, from this little village that isn't doing very well, with crappy father and a crappy older brother. They both die, and the whole thing that sets up Zhu, or pre-Zhu, I don't know what to call. We don't know her name before this.
No.
Is like she got not fortune telling, but like a fate
Equivalent, I would say.
telling.
Yeah, I mean,
I know it's an equivalent, but it's not. It's to their culture. I feel like it's a
right.
bit culturally insensitive for you to say that. But anyways, the dad asks about, like, the brother, because his name is Zhu Chongba, and how they do naming process. He's supposed to be like up for greatness and all this stuff. He's supposed to be like, his fate is greatness, right? And
We're
then
the chosen one.
right, essentially. And she is not. And so then when her brother passes away, she literally becomes him. She pretends to be Zhu Chongba and then goes into the monastery, because that's the only way she thinks she could survive. Does all that. And then you see her, like, fast forward and do some kind of starting, like, she is super single-minded. What drives her is the fact that she doesn't want to be nothing, which is what she got with her telling of her fate. And, like, she's so scared of that, she literally will do anything to not have that fate. And it starts off in, like, small things here and there, and then it just progressively snowballs into, like, killing children, as Michael mentioned, or killing people, because she is a monk and she's not supposed to do that, and she does. So she's a super interesting character, because, like, she is the main character. Like, I would say out of the book, probably 70% of the time is who you follow. You follow her. So she is your main protagonist there. And she is a gray protagonist, if not, like I said, leaning toward villainous protagonist. And it's really interesting to kind of see her grapple with having to do these things and still be okay with it, because of her very single-minded goal for greatness. And it starts off as like, okay, I'm gonna just, like, people are gonna know my name, and then people are gonna know what I did, to, like, I want to rule the world. Well, I want to rule what she thinks is the world, like,
Right,
I want to rule China, essentially.
exactly.
Like, I want to be the head man here, type thing. So yeah, she's a very, very interesting character, because it's it's not so, like Michael said, like it's not your stereotypical hero trope where like they're good and they're just one like single-sided person. Like these characters are extremely layered, like very much so. And I think out of everyone, her and like a few other characters more so, obviously, because they're kind of like the main people you're following. So it's just interesting to see how she grapples with her quote unquote greatness, and how she, what is the word we're looking for, justifies her actions as
Yeah.
saying like, well, this is okay because it's going to bring me to this, and once I rule, I will be great for it, and right now we have an awful ruler. It's like, well, you're kind of stepping on these people, and are you sure like that makes you any better than the people you're saying aren't good in power now? Like, it's a great dynamic. Love that. Love yeah, that's kind of Zhu.
Yeah, no, I think that was a really good. I mean, she's the main character. That was a good
Yeah.
snapshot.
And she does grapple with the fact that like she is a woman, was born a woman, took the mantle of being her brother a man, and she was so against doing anything that was like a feminine trait because she was so scared that the gods in the heaven, not gods, the heaven would be like, "Oh, you're showing feminine traits. You're going to go back. You're going to lose your fate of being great if you show this." And then she actually learned that like that's what actually propelled her forward towards. So that was really interesting way to see that, how like originally she was like, I want nothing to do with being a woman, like it's awful in this world and period. And then slowly she saw like those traits are what got her to where she was, and she finally like starts to, I feel like, embrace it somewhat towards the end there. And like that's what makes her so different and better at doing this, because she, I think, has both, I feel like.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very good take on that. I agree. I know usually we alternate on these. Do you want to also do Ma, since I know she's one of your favorite characters?
Okay, Ma Shu Ying is, she starts off being engaged to, okay, so there are two groups, the red turbans and then Mongols. Am I pronouncing that Mongols correctly?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, and they're at war. The red turbans are de facto people who don't like the ruling that they're against, and so they kind of build their own little, like, what is it called when you break apart from
A
like
rebellion.
rebellion? Thank you. They're the rebellion essentially. And Ma is engaged to one of the people's advisor in this camp of these people. Like her dad technically was like the main general of these people, but before we get her point of view, her father is betrayed and killed because of he didn't agree with the prime minister, and the prime minister of this group, like, so this is the part that gets like kind of confusing. Like, we have the Prince of Radiance. He's this little child who's like 7, who has like the mandate, which is the fact that you can make fire appear, essentially, and he's supposed to be like the second coming and supposed to bring like this new world order to this country, and he's supposed to do all these things, and that's why these people are following him. And then because he's a child, there's a guy, the prime minister, who's like, oh, I'll be his voice until he gets older, and he's kind of a crappy person. So how Ma fits into that is like,
kind of.
well, okay, I feel like everyone's a crappy people. She fits in the fact that like she is part of this like plot, but she's engaged to one of the generals. They call him Little Guo, and she is kind of stuck with him. And she what I like about her character is like she is one of those people who just really genuinely cares about people. Like she loves full-hearted like everything. Like you meet her first when she's trying to like save this poor woman that these people are like picking on her. And Zhu even comments like, why are you helping her? Like it costs nothing for you, and you actually got hurt for doing this and nothing happened out of it. And she's like, why wouldn't I? Like, she needed help, I'm gonna help. Like, she's what you would normally think of a stereotypical hero character trope. Like, that's Ma,
Yep.
like she's extremely smart, very learned and stuff like that. And like, just because she's a woman, no one pays attention to her. No one, believes her when she's saying stuff like to her original Little Guo. Like, she's saying like, hey, like, you need to be careful, you're gonna get yourself killed, blah 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 blah. And he's like, screw you, you're a woman. And case in point, she was right. So she catches Zhu's eye. Zhu asked for her to be like engaged and marry her. And originally Ma was like, no, like I don't want to be stuck in this life of just being this woman who's just married off to like have babies and that's all. Zhu shows her that like, hey, I understand you because I am also a woman. And so she agrees to that. And I feel like she's going to be Zhu's foil in the sense that like Zhu, or the moral compass, like Zhu is heading towards maybe like not a great path, and I'm hoping Ma's gonna be the one who's gonna be like, hey, like remember you made me a promise when we got engaged that you were going to listen to me and that you were going to like kind of pay attention to what I say and like remember my perspective, and like we're not these terrible people, we don't want to rule this way. So I'm curious to know how their dynamic is going to be, because it kind of ended on a like, if you ask me, a sour note between them, in the sense that like Ma does not agree with these last killings that Zhu did and didn't talk to her about it and just did it. And yeah, I'm curious to know how that's all gonna go. And she truly is just like this wonderful person who just cares so much about people, you know, and in a world that she lives in, like that's rare and far between, and she's not willing to step on other people to get what she wants.
Yeah.
Where all these other characters are. So it's just like she's like the light and the darkness of all these other characters.
Yeah, everybody else is just trying to get ahead and very politicians.
Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Next character is Ouyang. Ouyang is a general in the Mongol army. I would say he is one of the primary antagonists, if not the primary antagonist of the book. He's at the very least one of the primary antagonists, if we assume there's multiple. He ends up not being at the end, but it's hard to...
See, that's what I'm saying. I feel like there's really no antagonists in the books and the like big bad scheme of things.
That's true, because in this book, it's very incredibly political, and they're all using each other to their own means.
Right.
Zhu was using Ouyang as much as Ouyang was using her for a different method. Anyway, he is one of the Mongol generals. He's a eunuch as well, and that's a big part of his perspective characters when we're like he despises women because they remind him of everything that he is not, I guess, because he's lacking all these like masculine things that he feels like he needs, and
that he is. And that's why he hates them.
Correct,
because everyone sees him very feminine because of that, and that's why,
and he hates being called beautiful and all that kind of stuff. But he is the I would say the main general of the Mongol side, and also has
no, he's the main general of the Henan region.
True, the Henan or the Yuan region.
No, Yuan is the huge region. They bow down to Yuan. He's the main head.
Okay.
He's a subordinate to Essen, who is the prince of Henan, and his father is the king of the Henan region.
Okay, that's right. He was also formerly a slave that belonged to Essen before, or I guess Essen's family before he was freed. But
people that Zhu is working with, the red turbans, Ouyang is technically of the same the same group of people. He is also a Nam Ren, so it's like his family did some stuff, got what happens when you get taken over, like conquered. His people got conquered, and Essen's family took him and then killed everyone. And that's like, he's not a Mongol. He works for them because
correct. That's true. He works for the Mongols. He is not right.
Yeah, confusing.
It is a little bit. Essen, who's the next character on our list, is a Mongol and is like Barbara said, the prince of the Henan region. I actually really enjoyed his character. He was a very complex character for a relatively minor character in the book.
Oh, I won't consider him minor. We get his point of view.
You do get his perspective at times. That's true. But anyway, he is the prince. He seems to, at least you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it seemed to be like a little bit of a romantic vibe between him and Ouyang, but a one-sided one.
One-sided. Ouyang is his best friend. He sees him as just a best friend, and he doesn't understand Ouyang's plight in the sense that he forgets that Ouyang's whole family died and he's alone and that he's a eunuch. And Essen's just like, oh, well, but like we're brothers because I took you away from slavery and made you in general. So like you must be so happy about life. And like Ouyang's like, internally dying here, and he's just like, oh, but like you're not a slave and you're a general, so you must be happy, right? Like he's your stereotypical rich person who like helps a poor like what how I see it is like a really 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 rich person, right, befriends this really 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 poor person and like helps them along the way and doesn't understand why they're still bitter at rich people.
Yeah.
That's how I feel like it, to break it down to make it like super simple to understand their dynamic. It's that.
Yeah. I really enjoyed their dynamic, and I really enjoyed when we were getting it from Ouyang's perspective,
Mm.
especially because you would get this like the author wrote it so well, where like it was
Mm-hmm.
almost like you could feel Ouyang's conflicting emotions in
Mm-hmm.
moments because he's like his friend Essen, like he's like he wants that and like that feels good and like just human emotions of like
Yep.
enjoying company and things like that. But then like you get like the counter of that where he's like, no, I shouldn't. I hate this. I hate him. You should hate him.
Right.
Why are we doing this? And it was a very cool way to write that, to see like that internal conflict with the two of them.
Yeah.
Was yeah.
Yeah, he was in love with Essen. Essen only saw him as a friend and then didn't truly understand his friend. Like
Yeah.
he really like the this character is like a three-layered person and he only saw the first level like layer of who he was and he doesn't
Mhm.
really understand why he betrayed him. The end.
Wang Baoyang or Baoxiang is Essen's adopted brother. In the same way, what it made me kept thinking of, which is this is going to be silly in hindsight, but I kept thinking about like Thor and Loki.
Very much so.
Like
Literally
that was a
very
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 much so.
similar to that like
Very.
that
Yeah.
dynamic because
Yeah.
Wang he was very like he'd made lots of jokes and he
Cerebral.
said things that were like he was very smart, yes, and not
Yeah.
and multiple times mentioned that he wasn't very like physically strong or physically.
That's a good. I never thought of the Thor and Loki.
I
That's
I
literally it. Like, I'm curious to know if, like, obviously they're real people, but it's like Thor and Loki aren't. So it's like whoever came up with Thor and Loki, like, did they get the idea from like this
yeah, I
brother?
don't know.
Are these people like, did this actually happen? Like, it's hard to say,
It's hard to, with historical fiction. It's always
Yeah,
hard to say.
yeah, yeah.
But the reason I came up with that in my head as I was reading it is I felt like a lot of what Wang, every time he talked, it was very Loki or like trickster coded. Like the way he
Mm-hmm.
spoke, it was like he was saying things that were like very polite on the surface, but you knew like there was a double meaning there, and that was designed to like stab
Mm-hmm.
a little bit and cause a little bit of pain. He was a really interesting character as well.
Mm-hmm.
But do you have anything else to add about him that I'm missing that we should discuss here?
Finances of their family, and the dad doesn't appreciate that and thinks he should go out hunting and like rah, be a man and blood and murder, and he's like, I'm doing you more of a service because I'm keeping this whole war for you, going, and if you didn't have this you wouldn't be able to offer anything to the yuan,
Yeah.
and the dad doesn't appreciate that, and then Essen goes from like loving his brother but not, once again, not understanding him but still like loving him, to thinking his brother killed their dad and then despising him but still loving him because it's still his brother, but like kind of being crappy to him because
Hmm.
he just assumes he was the one who murdered the dad, and then come to find out obviously he wasn't. I think we're going to see more of Wang. I think I'm curious. I hope that we get his perspective since Essence dies at the end of this book. So I'm hoping we'll see, and I'm curious to know how he's going to go about life now with
Yeah.
the fall of his whole family, essentially. It's short. Zuda is one of the monks that Zhu Chongba grew up with in the monastery, his best friend, essentially. They, like, were bunk buddies, and Zhu obviously hid the fact that she was a woman, and Shu knew about it, didn't make a big deal about it, still called Zhu, like, little brother. Like, they have a really amazing friendship. It's I really like their
Hmm.
dynamic and their friendship and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean that's
And
it.
they
Like
really
he's
were like brothers. Like
right. They call each other
yeah.
brothers and stuff like that. He's Zoo's like right hand man in climbing up the ranks and stuff like that. Like he's his number one general. He trusts him wholeheartedly, and like the people that Zoo loves are.
And then our last character is Chen. Chen is, if everybody else on this list except for Zhu is playing checkers, Chen's playing chess.
Yeah.
He's a political mastermind. He is one of the two advisors of the prime minister, but he is like it's very clear that he is like 10 steps ahead of everybody else
Mhm.
in like these, and his ambitions are very similar to Zhu's ambitions, and that he also wants to
Rule the world.
rule the world, for lack of a better term. Yeah, he wants to
Right?
rule the world.
Yeah.
And I mean, he was a very well written character. He was a political machine,
I have a feeling
and
we're gonna see more of him because he didn't
oh yeah,
die.
he didn't die. He didn't die, but like the author even mentions like at the very near the end of the book that you never count Chen
Underestimate. Yeah.
out, even if he effectively is just like a rep or a bandit lord at this
Yeah.
point. Like never count him out. So
Yeah.
I think we will definitely see him again. There's no way he's going down and just gonna go hide after that.
No.
He will rise from those ashes, and I think will be a problem in the
That's
second
what I'm
book.
saying. Like, if of all the characters who are like very evil, I would say he's that one. Like, he definitely falls under that. Like, everyone else is kind of, I would say, morally gray. Like, yes, Ouyang betrays like his only, not his only family, like the people who made him a slave, who killed his,
Yeah,
like, he's on a vendetta. Like, the reason what propels him is vengeance for the death of everyone in his family. He's literally like the last one left, and he will be the last one left because he's a eunuch and stuff. So like that's what propels him, and like Zhu is like her greatness and blah blah, and then Chen's just like, I just want to be the ruler. Like,
I
and I
mean,
will murder and steal and kill and do all the things to get to that position.
I think the only difference between Chen and Zhu is that from the beginning, Chen knew he was willing to do anything to
Mm,
accomplish his goals, and it took Zhu some time to
yeah,
realize that she would do the same things to
same, yeah.
accomplish hers.
But like she still tells herself like, I'm going to be different than Chen, and
Oh yeah,
it's
no,
like,
she totally believes she's better
yeah,
than
and I'm
him.
like, very curious to know how she's gonna spin this. Like, how are you? Because right now, like at the end of the book, you and Chen look the same to me. If you, although Chen, the difference, okay, the one difference is Zhu generally does care for her soldiers and her people that she's leading into battle.
True.
And she does care for certain people, whereas Chen, I feel like you could be like his wife, and if he could get further by like selling you to a slave trader, he would, type thing. Like, I think that's the only distinction, is like Chen is willing to sacrifice, and he sacrificed armies of people of the red turbans to get what he wanted, whereas Zhu was unwilling to do that, and she definitely felt bad when she kind
Hmm.
of had to like poison and kill some of them to like keep them away from another fight. She was like, was that worth it? Because still a lot of my men died. And that, obviously, we don't know because we don't see Chen's perspective. We have no
That's true.
idea. But his actions seemed otherwise, because he was very willing to like murder and allow a lot of people to die to get what he wanted. I think that's the slight, small
Yeah.
distinction.
I think though, and I get it in this book where you're coming from with that, but I think if you flip the perspectives, then I think that from if we didn't get Zoo's perspective, she would probably seem the same because we wouldn't get her
Mm.
internal struggles with that. We would
True.
just see what
Right.
she
And that's what
did.
I'm saying. The
Yeah.
beauty of like what people always say is like every hero or every villain is their own hero in their own story. So obviously, like, probably if we got Chin's perspective, he'd be like, well, I'm saving this for the greater
Yeah.
good type,
Oh yeah. No,
So
you could
yeah.
totally write this story where Chen's the hero and he loses at the beginning of the first book, and
Right.
then the second book is his rise to greatness again.
Well, who's to know? We
Maybe.
don't know.
Maybe. I'm just saying, like theoretically. But anyway, let's move on to our discussion questions. We spent a lot of time talking about the characters this time, but that's because, like we both said, they're just really fantastic
Yes.
characters.
Very well written characters.
So the first question is, Zhu is driven by a desire to avoid nothingness. How does this fear shape her decisions, relationships, and identity throughout the novel?
That is what makes her tick. That's literally what shapes every decision she makes up to a certain point in the book. So to hide who she is in the monastery, she does a bunch of stuff to keep her gender a secret. She relationships, same thing. Like, literally, that is what drives her, and that's how she identifies. Is like, I don't want anything to do with who I was when I took the Zhu Chongba mantle, essentially. And then when she loses her arm from Ouyang, right arm, and he thought that was like the worst thing that could happen to her, and then she realizes like being a woman was what made me thrive. Like, I that isn't my only identity, is the ability to swing a sword. Like, I'm more
Mm-hmm.
than this. I've always been more than this. And so then she realizes like her desire to avoid nothingness is gone, and now it's her desire to just be greatness is instead, you know.
Yeah.
So like that's a shift. But yeah, for sure, like that's literally the driving force for her. Like she is scared shitless to be nothing. That's the driving for her whole character up until a certain point of the book.
Yeah. You nailed that. I really don't have a lot to add to that. But yes, she doesn't want to be nothing, and so she'll do anything, literally anything, to avoid that fate. But I think you really hit the nail on the head on that one. I don't have much to add. Nice answer.
Thanks.
Next question. How do Zhu and Ouyang's struggles with gender, identity, and societal expectations parallel or diverge? In what ways do these conflicts shape their paths? I think that when you get to the end of the book, you realize that there are a lot of parallels between Zhu and Ouyang's struggle with their gender and identity and the societal expectations. They're similar but different. They both have, well, in the case of Zhu, she transforms into kind of a genderless person to accomplish her goals, because she knows that in the society that if she is a woman, that she would never be able to be this greatness that was her brother's fate. On the flip side of that, Ouyang struggles because he will never be seen as like a man. That happens all the time when you're seeing his perspective. Like you hear the way he's referred to, and different comments that are made about how like beautiful he is and things like that, and he just hates that. And I think that they both struggle with their gender and identity and all of that in a lot of similar ways for different reasons. The biggest difference, obviously, is that Zhu makes that choice for herself. And Ouyang obviously didn't have a choice in the matter. His was part of, the very popular punishment of the time of ending a bloodline. Just, yeah, insane. But I think that the conflicts literally shape the path. Like the fact that they're having these internal and external conflicts about who they are. That's the thing that pushes Zhu, like Barbara said in the last question, to greatness, is that she does not want to be nothingness, and she equates nothingness with being a woman in this era. And on the same side, like Ouyang is there and his struggle, and he's vengeance. That's all his entire mission. Everything in the book is all about revenge. And it's a very intricate plot that he weaves to. I mean, there's a lot of politics even in that. It's hard to say, weaving in and out, and the different deceits and different, things he has to plant and certain things to make happen. And that literally, like, these things shape their paths entirely.
Yeah, so like Zhu describes in the book, like understands like. They're similar in the sense, and they literally, like Zhu even mentions, like she has this tether to Ouyang because she understands him on a cellular level, or whatever you want to call it, because they are both struggling with the same thing, like gender identity, that those types of things. And but like I think how that is the parallel. I think how they differ is the fact that Zhu finally embraces both genders, I think. And I'm just seeing this as like, obviously gender isn't just A and B, like it's a whole plethora of a thing. But I think for Zhu, it was, she didn't really identify as either, but she was so scared of people finding out that she was a woman. But then she finally embraces that part of her, understands that she is both, I would say, whereas Ouyang is like the opposite. Like people see him as both, but like in an inferior way. Like he will never be a man, and they see him, quote unquote, with these feminine traits and stuff like that, and he absolutely hates that. So instead of like embracing both sides, he disregards one and solely focuses on like what he so badly wants to be seen as a man in this society that only appreciates men and hates that other people don't like see him less than. And I think that's where they diverge, but like they're similar in the sense that they're both struggling with this feeling of all these things, and that literally connects them. It's like the red thread, and instead of like love, it's like similarity type thing. So how these conflicts, like they're constantly going to be running into each other. Like the whole thing that set Ouyang into his fate, as he calls it, because like before all this, he was honestly happily being Essen's general and doing all this stuff, and not really like, he kept prolonging the fact that he needed revenge on this family. And then Zhu comes along and kind of screws that up for him, and he blames Zhu for like setting his path to his quote, what he calls his fate, is the revenging against all these people that murdered his whole family. And that's how they are connected. And Zhu even says like, we are going to like keep running into each other until something gives, you know, whether they work together at the end or whether they destroy, like, it, you know, one or the other, like someone has to give here. So I feel like that's how they.
Yeah, I agree. Let's see. Next question. Zhu's ambition leads her to make sacrifices and sometimes morally ambiguous decisions. At what points does her ambition serve as an asset, and at what points does it become a liability? And how did your perception of Zhu's ambitions change over the course of the story?
I feel like we've kind of touched base on that.
We
Like,
have for sure, yeah.
obviously, morally ambiguous decisions. Like, what does like serve as an asset? In the beginning, it's like kind of fine. Like, yeah, she got one of the monks kicked out but he was kind of a shitty person anyway, so you don't really feel bad for kind of what she did. At least I didn't. And then it slowly starts getting like worse and worse. Like, you know, like where do we draw the line with that? And it's throughout the book you see that like I said, like slowly shifting into that, where to prove something she goes and murders this one person who, I mean, did he seem like kind of a crappy person? Like, yeah, but like that's not for her to judge, you know? Like,
right.
maybe he would have been an okay person, but like to put a woman in place of power, the woman asked her to go and murder this guy, and she did. And so then that's kind of feels like that was the tipping point where she was okay in murdering people to get where she needed to be. And my perception of her ambitions changed, because at first I was like rooting for her. I was like, yes, girl, like we're gonna be great. And now I'm like, ooh, like, at what cost, you
Yeah.
know? Like
Right.
maybe not. And like with each time that she has these struggles of like murdering these people, like it gets less and less, and you're like, I don't think I agree with this. And like the tipping point is when she murders the Prince of Radiance, as they called him, and he literally just served a purpose. Like, she quote unquote saved him to get his blessing to be a ruler, and then just offed him. Yeah, and that's the full shift, I feel like.
Man, I feel like, and like you said, we have talked about this topic quite a bit because we've enjoyed talking about these characters, but I think that it was almost exactly that for me. Like, I'm reading through it, and at the beginning, you're like, "Yeah, Zoo, like stick it to the man. Like you can do it. Like, you know, like girl power. Like, you got this.
Right.
You can, buck the system. That's buck, BUCK, if there's a censor listening. And then like it just like as the book goes on, she keeps like, it's like she does one thing, you're like, oh, well, but that's all right. He was a bad person, and then like you get to a point. And for me, that point was a little bit different, I think, than Barbara, because you said your point was when she killed the Prince of Radiance. And for me,
a
sorry,
little
go ahead.
before. No, mine would
that.
have been a little before that, but like that to me, that was like, okay, like there's no excuse now. Like we can't come back from this type thing.
Yeah.
Not like the other parts. I was like, okay, this is great. We're really towing the line here, my man. Like, what are we doing? And then that was just like, okay, there's no going back from this now.
Yeah. And that was definitely like there's no going back moment. But the first thing for me where I was like, oh man, I don't know if I like, is when she deceives the prime minister into essentially coming to her.
Right.
And then just like slits his throat
right. Yes.
in cold blood.
Yeah, same.
And it's just like, damn, like, yeah, he's a bad dude, but like you lied to him to get him to come here under false pretenses, and then you just like cut his throat. Like, I was like, ooh. Like, that was the first moment in the book where I was like, God, I don't know if I can like I get why she did it, but I was like, I don't know if I can like forgive her for that. Like, you know, that's like yes, like I get where she's going with it and why, but it's like, oh God, it's like her her morality just kept like plummeting, and that was the tipping point for me. And then I just, at that point I was like, well, hopefully like maybe no more. And then like shortly afterwards when she kills the child, and it's like, Jesus Christ, like, whoa. So yeah, that that was where I was at with that one. Wu Yang's ambitions are complex and often tied to revenge. How do these motivations influence the choices he makes, and what does this say about the role of personal vengeance versus loyalty to a greater cause? We kind of already talked about this when we talked about the two of them and compared and contrasted, and maybe over-answered that question, but that's okay. That's what we're here for, to talk about this. So yeah, I mean, his only motivation is really revenge. You find out it doesn't seem like that at first when you meet his character, but once you really get like the lay of the land of his plot that he has working, that's when you fully understand, that that's pretty much like vengeance is what drives him, period. And so, yeah, that the desire for vengeance against the family that killed his family and also made him a eunuch is entirely what influences all of the choices that he makes. Man, that last one is like a philosophical question, like, personal vengeance versus loyalty to a greater cause. I think that, like Barbara said earlier, everybody feels like they're the hero in their own story. And so, while, like, from a third party perspective or third person perspective, where you're like omnipotent and seeing all of it, you can say, like, well, Ouyang's kind of like wasting the life that he does have in this personal vendetta, and he could be doing other things and pushing and making his life greater, because like there's part in the book where Essen's like, hey, once we accomplish this, like, I'm gonna make my father give you your own estate, we're gonna give you an adopted son, we realize you can't have kids, we're gonna let your family line continue, and all these potentially good things that would have happened for him if he had towed the line and continued to do what he was doing previously for this family in the Mongols. And he can't overlook his vengeance for that. And I think that from an omnipotent perspective, it's easy to look at that and say, like, well, hold on, like, your life would, like, you could do that first and then attack this issue from a position of like power, or like the equivalent of like a noble in this society. But when you see his perspective, you get it. It's like that is what drives him, is the fact that he needs to get vengeance for his family, and that is his goal in his story, his story, as the hero in his own story.
Interesting. So I feel like I've already answered the first part of this question. As far as like what does this say about personal vengeance versus loyalty to a greater cause, I think it's funny because the reason why he's in this personal vendetta for vengeance is because he's so loyal to his family. He's literally being haunted by the ghosts of his family members. Like, we haven't talked about that, but like Zhu and a few other people some people can perceive ghosts and other people can literally see them. It's anyone with a mandate is what I'm assuming. So anyone with a mandate, that's this power to create this light. Zhu's part, she calls it radiance, and other people's like a fire in their hand. You can see these ghosts. And Ouyang literally has his family ghosts following him everywhere. And it like mentions in the book, like, people can like, it seems something seems off by him, but like he's literally haunted by the ghosts of his past, of his family members. And he is so loyal to his family and his family line that he's willing to sacrifice everything else for this vengeance that he is seeking for them. And so like, should he be loyal to these people who did this to him? No, honestly, I don't think so. I really don't, because like they did all of this to him and he's supposed to be grateful for them allowing him to live. Like, that's the whole point that Essen doesn't understand. Like, oh, okay, sure, like you could have this plot and you can have children that's not technically bloodline of yours and all this stuff, but like that's not what he wants. Like, he just wanted his family back. And like he even mentions, like, is this ever going to, like, that's not going to give my family back. Like, I understand vengeance isn't like all it's cracked up to be, it doesn't taste as sweet as I thought it would, and all of these things, but like he's extremely loyal person, because you can see that this is literally breaking his heart doing all of this to Essen, because he loves him so much. Not only as like love, like romantic love, it's a familial love too. Like, Essen was his only family now after everything that happened to his family, and he's breaking that bond to get revenge for his actual family. So honestly, out of everyone, I think Ouyang is the most loyal character.
Yeah,
when you're
that's
thinking
true.
about it, because even if he's doing all this stuff, you can see he literally says, like, I will never financially recover. How to say that joke. He literally says, like, I will never recover from what I did to Essen. And so I'm curious to know, like, how that's going to play out in the second book. But like, yeah, so I think that's a very interesting dichotomy that he's going through.
That was a really interesting way to put that, and I forgot about mentioning the ghosts that are like tied to him, because that
Mm-hmm.
was such a cool scene in the book when we see him approaching the first time from the lens of someone who had the mandate and could see the ghosts, and it
Mm-hmm.
was described as like, yes, like you said, his family is tied, but there was like, it was like this guy's walking up, there's like an army of
Yes.
ghosts with
Yep.
him, because like he tied
Constantly.
all the people that he had killed and murdered and all, like all also were tied to him, is what I think the author described at one
No.
point, is that it wasn't just his family.
No, I
It
think it
was
is
more than
just
that,
his
wasn't it?
family. No, I think it's literally his full family line, so that's why it's a lot of people.
Oh, so it's just, okay. I guess
Yeah.
everybody, the whole clan
The
that got
whole, like,
murdered.
yeah,
I see.
the whole Oyens.
Discuss the relationship between Zhu and Ma. How does their marriage evolve, and how do ambition and love intersect or conflict in their partnership?
Yes, their relations are very, very interesting. Like, you see Zhu fall for Ma, and I feel like I don't know if I would describe it as like romantic in the beginning. Like maybe there's a hint of romance there for Zhu, not so much for Ma. I think what interests Ma to Zhu is the fact that Zhu was the first, what she originally thought was a man, who was like, "Hey, I see you for you." And not just as a woman who can bear children and that's about it. Because as like we already mentioned, that's what women in this society, that's pretty much what they were good for. So like Zhu is the first person that Ma was like, oh wow, like they truly understand me type thing. And then I think for Zhu, I think it was a little more than that. I do generally think that it was maybe like a crush, because she saw how different Ma was, in the sense that like she generally is such a, what other way of saying, like a nice person. And she didn't understand that. Like Zu's
Yeah.
like, what? Like she has no, like her ambitions, like she has them, but it's not like I want to rule the world or I want to do this. Like she just genuinely just cares for people. And I think like Zhu has never met someone like that, so she's like genuinely intrigued by this. And then their marriage was a marriage of convenience, really. Like Ma was engaged to Lu Guo, and essentially, like, she has nothing left once he dies, and the whole Guo line is gonna go belly up because of what Chen is doing. And Zhu actually cares for Ma, and was like, okay, I want to save her, so, like, why don't you get married to me? And Ma was like, nah, son, I'm good. Like, like, I don't want, like, you showed me I don't want this life. I don't know what I want, but this isn't it. Like, I want more for myself. I just don't know what. And then Zhu finally was like, hey, like, the reason why I understand you, the reason why I feel like I am different than all these other men that you could potentially be stuck with, is because I too am a woman. So I see both sides of things,
Yeah.
like I'm saying, like, obviously gender isn't just two, but in this point, like, she's like, I see as a man, I see as a woman, like I am this different entity that can understand both sides. And Ma was like, oh, okay, like, sure. So it was just a marriage of convenience. Like, there was no romance to it. And then slowly they fall for each other. Like, generally, like, they care for each other, they fall for each other. And Ma generally does love Zhu so much that she's willing to stick with Zhu after everything that Zhu did towards the end, where you see her murder a bunch of people and the child to get where she wants. And Zhu kind of gives her an ultimatum. There's no kind of, she gives her an ultimatum. She says like, hey, either you can stick with me and I'm going to be the emperor and I'll make you my empress and we'll rule together type thing, or you can leave, like I'll let you leave or whatever. And, I won't like murder you type thing, but like you can just leave. And that's Ma's struggle. And she even mentions that like it's the struggle is that she loves you so much that she's willing to bear the burden of the love by sticking with her, even when she sees her, I don't know about a slow descent into darkness at this point, like girl
Yeah.
jumped in. There was no like light touch. She just fully like
Yeah.
dove headfirst into this. And so it's interesting because you can see how like it's going to be painful, and it already is for Ma, because of how she feels about people and what she's willing to not do, whereas Zhu is willing to sacrifice all this stuff. But like they do genuinely love each other. I just think Ma Zhu is a selfish person. Like she really is. Like she wants all these things and she's willing to help she's bringing her, Shu and Ma with her, but like she doesn't care what her actions will do to them. Whereas Ma is like the complete opposite. Like she is the
Hmm.
self-sacrificing archetype. Like she's willing to bleed out and like give her bleeding heart to Zhu if that's what Zhu needs type thing. And it's really,
Yeah.
like I said, it's a foil each other. They're foils for one another, and I'm very curious to see how their relationship will evolve in the second book. But I think their dynamic is very interesting. I really liked the partnership because it wasn't like an insta love, or it wasn't like, it truly was like a friendship that evolved into love after they were married.
Yeah. No, it's, yeah. I will just say up front, I hated that scene that you mentioned when Zhu gives Ma the
Oh
ultimatum,
yeah, I was like, you
because like,
bitch.
oh, that hurt, because
Oh yeah.
it's like Zhu awakened, effectively she awakened personhood in
Mhm.
Ma
Mhm.
and told her, you can be your own person, you can have your own
Mhm.
thoughts, you can do
Mhm.
all this stuff. And then when that was like the most minor inconvenience, then Zhu's like, you need to know your place, woman. And like, it's like, what? Like, oh, that stung.
I don't
Like,
know if it was like you need to see your place. I think it was more of, this is how I interpreted it. And even Ma said it. She was like, you promised that you were going to listen to me, that you promised that there's always another way. You promised all these things, that like it doesn't have to be just cutthroat.
mhm,
But you threw that back in my face and said, no, there's only one way to get to the top. It is cutthroat. There is no other way. There's no nice way of doing this. Either you're with me or not.
yeah,
So it's like, girl, like you promised her the world and you kind of threw it back in her face,
yep,
and you weren't,
hated that.
yeah, and like you weren't willing to listen to her.
No,
And
told her to shut
that
up.
yeah, yeah, and it's kind
Shut
of
up and
like,
fall in line or leave.
yeah, and I'm like,
Pretty
oh,
much. I
come
mean,
on. Like, you
yeah.
literally were like, I was like, you were supposed to be different, Sue.
You were the chosen
You were
one.
the chosen one. Like, how dare you hurt my Marshmallow Mock character, okay? How
I
dare you?
know. Now, in another one of my favorite scenes in the book, which is a very darkly funny scene, but like we mentioned earlier, Ma was originally betrothed to little Guan. And there's a scene where little Guan has failed and is getting executed by being pulled apart by
Oh,
five
gosh.
horses.
Wow, you're gonna... Okay, yeah.
And at that scene, because obviously Zhu and Zuda are there, because
Hmm.
it's like a big ceremony, like public executions were. And Zuda makes this like
It's Sue and
comment.
Shu.
Sorry, Zhu and Shu makes this comment that's in my head. I heard it like, "Oh no!" It's like, now Ma is single. What will you do? Like,
Right?
it was just like, it was funny. It was a very like not
Dark.
funny scene, but it was a very funny like, oh no! Like, now what will Ma do? Zhu, huh?
Right,
Like,
like a best friend knows that you
right,
have a crush on someone. And it's like, hey,
exactly.
nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Like, she's single now.
And it was hilarious, and I have a very dark sense of humor, and so I thought it was even funnier that scene happened while a man was getting pulled apart
Yeah,
by
yeah,
horses. But very graphically violent the book is, if
yeah,
we didn't mention that
yeah.
previously. But anyway, God, their relationship was fascinating. I really enjoyed that part of the book. I am, as our listeners know, not usually someone who comes in and talks about how much I love the romance. Their story, though, was great. I almost wanted to hear more about what was going on there. It
Mm-hmm.
was a very, very captivating story in the way that they changed each other, because, like Barbara mentioned just a minute ago, like, and I mentioned too, like, Zhu brought Ma out of her shell and let her know it was okay to like, be her own person. But Ma kind of also did that for Zhu,
Mm-hmm.
because Ma's like, listen, like, you can embrace some of these parts of your femininity too. Like, that's okay. You don't have to. It was just, it was a very, I really enjoyed their story. And I am also very excited to see how their relationship evolves in the next
Yeah.
book.
I hope it's like Zoo's on like, well, she's already over the edge. Like, there's no like jumping to like, my girl, like I said, dove through the edge, but I'm hoping like maybe Mom will like pull her back.
Yeah, I hope so
Like,
too.
there redemption for her? I mean, normally no, I would say there's not.
She
But
murdered a child.
I know there's no going back from that, but I'm hoping like maybe Ma will be like, let's reset this moral compass, let's like what we originally talked about. And I'm hoping that happens and Zoo doesn't just go cray cray, but who knows? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, that too, like that scene between the two of not of her murdering the child, but the when Zhu brings the Radiant Prince back, and there's this whole like really sweet
I
scene of
know.
Ma taking care of him and being very maternal and
Yeah.
loving,
Like, "Oh, this
and
is a
Zhu
family,
is
what I
part of
wanted
this
to."
scene. Like
Yeah.
they're all in like in bed together, like
Yeah.
snuggling like a family, and then like literally it's like slam cut to like, well, you served your purpose, stab, and it's like, oh my god. But anyway, the that's my extended feelings about Zhu and Ma. I feel like Barbara did a good job covering a lot of that. How does this novel explore the concept of fate and greatness? Do you think Zhu's greatness was inevitable, or was it something she created by her own will? I think in some ways we've kind of answered this already, sort of, but I will now explicitly say no, I do not think Zhu's greatness was inevitable. I think that she literally, like, this is the definition of like pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Like, she was meant to be nothing, even outside of that fate. Like, she lived in an area where there was a drought and everyone was dying and they had like seeds to eat. They could have like a quarter of a seed a day or something. Her dad and brother were horrible. They effectively, like, it was implied that like if it came to a point where like cannibalism needed to happen, she was going to get eaten because she was nothing and they were something. And it's just like, so like from that to like at the end of the book being like on the way to being maybe the emperor of like this area in China is crazy. So no, I do not think. I think that Zhu's belief in fate and the belief that she thought that that was the fate for Zhu Chongba, her brother,
Mhm. Mhm.
I think that drove her. But I think at the end of the day, it was like she created that and she did it all by just will,
Will.
pure willpower. There were some really dark things that happened in that too, like we've talked about already. But I think that it was not inevitable. Like I think she was a force of nature. We didn't even talk about that scene. She was literally a force of nature at one point. But yeah, I think she made that happen. That's my opinion on that question.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. Like, no, it wasn't inevitable. Like, she did that herself, from everything that she wanted. Concept of fate and greatness. Like, she believes so much in her. Like, I wish I had that confidence in myself, if I had like an iota of the confidence that she had in herself, like, maybe I could have done something, but like,
Right?
yeah, 100% I agree with Michael. Like, that's all her.
It's like, no, you're actually a peasant. And so she's like, no, actually, I'm meant to be a god.
Yeah,
So I don't know
right.
what you're
Like,
talking
I'm
about.
actually gonna be an emperor, mind you. So just don't you wait and see. Like, so yeah, no, I think it's interesting because all of these characters are like, oh, like this is my fate, and it's inevitable, and blah blah blah. But it's like, it's funny because it's like we obviously, well, I don't know. I think maybe it's a culture thing too. Like maybe some cultures really do believe like this is strings like you drew in life, and that is what it is. You can fight it as much as you want, but you're not going to break free of this fate. Whereas other ones like, no, that's not a thing. Like you're the one, like you create your fate. Like you're the one who drives that. So it's interesting to see the novel explore that too. And like I'm of the belief that like everything that they did, these characters, like they did that for themselves. It wasn't just like this greater power like dictating it type thing. So
All right, here we go. Penultimate question. How does Parker-Chan portray the cost of survival, both physically and psychologically, for characters like Zhu and Ouyang? Are these sacrifices worth the outcomes they achieve?
I mean, literally the cost of survival. Like Zhu lost an arm. If we're literally talking about this, even before that, like she, like buried her parents because of like that. She went through like she had to hide her identity of who she was to get into the monastery to survive that way, to get like 3 full meals a day. She literally like she did all this stuff to do it. Like she's literally marked as being a monk because they wear like that crown that like burns their what are we talking about, their skin on
Scalp.
their scalp. She literally loses her arm in doing all of this stuff. Ouyang's the like same with him. Like everyone else in his family died, and he literally begged to be saved, and the ultimate sacrifice he paid for that was being a eunuch. Like that was the price that he paid to be alive. So it's like they sacrifice literally all of these things to put themselves further and further, and then that to what they see as their fate, essentially. Like, I feel like they're willing to sacrifice literally everything. Oying's his love, Essen, essentially, and all this stuff. Like, and I do think there is going to be a physical, like, literally there is a physical transformation for like Zhu, and I think for Oying too. Like, I think it's gonna. I'm curious to know, well, like, what that's going to look like.
No, I definitely am too, to see how that's going to pan out in the next book. God, that last question is tough. Like, are these sacrifices worth the outcomes they achieve?
I mean, if you ask them,
Barbara already
they
laid
say
out the
yes.
sacrifices, and you're right. If you ask the characters, they would, like, without question,
No
say
doubt.
yes. But I feel like for both of them, like, I don't like, if you look at like the stuff that Zhu did, like, it's hard to, like, as a third party viewer, be like, I don't know, was it worth?
I mean,
that?
if she becomes emperor, would you not say so?
I mean, true. I think it's in some ways maybe a little bit easier to look at Uyang's from an outside perspective and say, like, was it worth it? Because especially when you consider like logically, if you were to able just like if he, the character, was able to pull away from his anger and vengeance and see that if he just sticks it out and deals with what he's been dealing with, that Essen would give him a title and
yeah, but like as a character,
line.
that's not important to him. That's
know,
what makes
it's
him
not.
him. So you can't just say like, oh, like you would have got a title. Like, would that bring back your family if you have a title?
It doesn't.
Like, it
It brings
doesn't.
back your bloodline, I guess, but not really, because
Not
it's an
really.
adopted
Right.
kid. I think the most important thing is what you said at the beginning of my answering when how are they worth the outcomes?
To them,
the character,
yes.
to them, yes, and they would not hesitate in giving you that answer.
Like, as a third party looking in, you can make all these rationales as to, well, how this isn't going to work out or it's not worth it. But like to them, and what makes them tick, 100%, I feel like they would have done the same thing over and over again if you asked them.
And I think they would say that any sacrifice is worth what they're going for, like what the outcome that they hope to achieve. Final question. The novel ends on a note that leaves Zhu's fate in a somewhat uncertain place. How do you interpret the ending, and what questions does it leave you with? I mean, there's a lot of questions that it leaves me with. I wonder, like, we've talked about a lot of the things as we go through this podcast. Like, I would like to know, like, what's next in Zhu's story? Like, is she going to accomplish her goal of being Emperor Supreme? That's not a real title. I made that up.
What?
But the Emperor, and I think that, people who are history buffs and are familiar, like, you kind of already know the answer to that question as far as what happens. But I'm more curious about Uyang, because at least from what I've briefly looked at, like, we don't know what's going to happen next. And I also really, the biggest question, I think, honestly, for me, that I'm most curious about reading in the second book is Chen's second coming. We know it's coming. I don't know from reading history. I should say that. I'm saying, as predicting things, like, there's no way that's the end of this man's story. At least I hope it's not. He was a very, very compelling character to read. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Yeah, obviously, like, Zhu was all like, oh, Zhu Chongba is gonna be greatness and blah blah blah. But at the end of the book, like, she renames herself, picks a new name, and so I think, as far as like uncertain, I think it's uncertain in the sense that, like, Zhu Chongba is no more. She is dropping that facade and going with the new one, and even like little Prince of Radiance dude was like, Zhu Chongba isn't gonna rule either, and Zhu's like, yeah, I know, it's gonna be someone else.
That was such like a hard line, like, oh, right.
I know, I got you, fam. I was like, oh, okay. So how do I interpret the ending? I interpret it as that, like, this is like a new beginning for Zhu, like a new persona, or whatever you want to call it, is for her greatness, a new stepping stone for her greatness, and she's going to achieve that. For Oyang, like, he literally, Essen was literally like, you're going to die doing this, how, attacking the Yuan, and he's like, yeah, I know, like, I understand, like, I know I'm going to die, I know this is going to happen, but like, I'm going to try, and it is what it is. So I'm curious to know, like, how that's going to happen. If maybe Zhu and Oyang work together to dethrone this emperor, and then Zhu kills Oyang, like, and then we have a new character appeared on the playing field, is the rice field people, that family, like Madame Zhang, I think is her name.
Yes. Yep.
Like, I'm very curious I have a feeling we're gonna get more of her character. I have a feeling that she's, like, briefly mentioned in this book, and she's going to be a new player, because it seems to be that way. Like, now we have, like, 3 people contesting for the emperor role, like Zhu's coming for her. I feel like that family and that lady Madame Zhang is coming, and then Ouyang is coming too. So it's just
Mm-hmm.
very, very curious to know how all this is gonna to play out. Obviously, I could just Google, I guess, to see, because like we said, these are based on real people. But I kind of don't want to ruin that for myself. But
Yeah. I mean, and also, like, it's historical fiction, so it would only give you some of the
true
story
that, true
because you
that, true
don't know
that.
if the
You don't
author
get from
changed
point A to
things.
point B. You just get the ending.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Which, I mean, you don't want to spoil the ending.
I mean, it's not spoiling if it
It's not.
happened.
It's very true. Unless the author dramatically changed the outcome of some of these
Right,
characters.
but like I said,
Then
like we don't know. It's about the journey, Michael. It's about the journey, and we don't know how these characters are gonna get there.
that is very true. So, on that note, let's wrap this episode up and talk about our individual scores for the book. Barbara, what was your score for the
Yes.
she who became the sun?
I gave it an 8.5. Like, I really enjoyed the characters. I thought the characters were very very well written. Obviously, there wasn't one character I really like.
Yeah.
Even like the crappy characters, I liked reading more about them and knowing the motives and what's going on and stuff like that. Like, genuinely, there was no point in time where I'm like, ugh, can we switch over to this character now? Like,
Right.
sometimes I do feel that way about other fantasy novels where I feel like I tend to gravitate towards some of them more than others. And this one, I was like, give it to me. Like, I want to know about these characters. It is so well written. So yeah, things I had an issue with was more like small little things here and there that I think would have made the overall reading experience a little bit better for me. But like, as far as this, like, some people might find it a little graphically violent and stuff. I personally didn't, but like I feel like that's a personal thing. Like, some people can tolerate things more than others.
Yeah.
I've never had a problem with this stuff, really. And some stuff, like, we don't see the murdering of the child. Like, it really is just like, it's implied, what happened.
Right.
But like, there isn't like, oh, and then she stabbed him through the eye, like that. We don't see that for that one. Like, do we get other character deaths that we see on page? Yeah, we do. So yeah, but I think overall I really enjoyed it. I'm really excited to read the second novel, and I believe it's just a duology. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
think you're right.
the issues I had were like minor stuff, and it wasn't overall issues with like the plot or the characters of the book, I think, except for like
Mhm.
that very beginning where I kind of had a few issues with. But yeah.
Yeah. My individual score was an 8 out of 10. I also really enjoyed the book, even with the gripes that I had talked about at the beginning of the episode, with how it was split up in the chapters. At the end of the day, it was still a fantastic story with fantastic characters, and I'm excited to read the next book. So an 8 out of 10 is where I landed. So our group score for this one, easy math for once, is an 8.25 out of 10.
For once, you gotta throw that in,
Ta-da.
don't you?
Yeah,
You
because if
just
you have,
have to.
I do. I'm always
Where's
going
my
to.
defenders?
Well, Lauren's not here this time to be on your side of that argument. As always, make sure you're following Badass Literature for free in your favorite podcast app. Give us a rating and leave us a review if they allow you to. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media. Our username is @BadassLitPod on both Instagram and Facebook.
Have feedback about today's episode? You can contact us by writing to badassliteraturesociety@gmail.com. You can also send us a DM or leave a comment on any of these socials that we have previously mentioned.
Thank you so much for listening. I'm Michael.
I'm Barbara. Bye.
Bye.